Hey everybody, hope you're having a good week. In this episode, we're going to be assembling the 360 for my yellow 79 Dodge Aspen. This 360 came out of a 78 Volare four-door sedan. Put a picture up here of it. So I picked up that car off Facebook Marketplace. It was a couple hours away from me. It was a perfect parts donor because it said it only has 63,000 K on the odometer. And I believe that to be fairly accurate, judging on the condition of the engine and the car itself. It was a perfect parts donor to get a couple other of my cars going. So this engine, we're going to basically just freshen it up, new rings, bearings, just putting the factory pistons back in it. Got a Hughes whiplash cam for it. I'll put up the cam card here so you can see the specs. So that Hughes cam has been designed to work with these low compression 360s. I've heard good things about it on the internet, so it'll be interesting to see how it works in this engine. Going to do some mild porting to the cylinder heads. It's going to get a RPM air gap intake with headers in the yellow car. The plan with this engine is for it to eventually work its way into the wagon. And then we're going to build a high compression 360 for the yellow 79 Dodge Aspen with a Trimix 6-speed behind it. So we're going to get this engine flipped over, get it all cleaned up, and drop the crankshaft in it. Crank's been sitting around for a little bit, so we want to make sure it's good and clean. So I tore this engine down and did just a quick hone on it. While it was sitting, I sprayed this in the cylinder bores and the lifter bores. It's just like a waxy grease to keep it from flash rusting. So what we're going to do is wipe that out of all the cylinders. Okay, so we got the block all cleaned up. Sprayed it down several times with brake cleaner. Made sure all the passages and whatnot were nice and clean. Now for the main bearings, I want to make sure the backside of the bearing is nice and clean. Don't want any oil or dirt in there. Same with where the bearing rides in the saddle here. Make sure it's nice and clean. Set the bearing in. Usually just start it on the side with a little tab on it. Just push her down into place. Want to make sure it's as even as possible to the main cap pads. Then we'll put some assembly lube, just using this Ultra Slick by Permatex. It's a nice heavy assembly lube. Put lots on there. And on this middle main bearing, it's got the thrust washer on it. So I want to make sure that gets a good amount of lube as well. Both sides, front and back. So those are ready. We're going to take the rear main seal. You can see on the seal itself the way the lip is. This lip here you want pointed toward the front of the engine. So push that down into place, making sure that lip is facing forward. Again, we're going to take some of our assembly lube, give it a coat just so it isn't dry on first startup. Stringy that assembly lube is, you want to make sure you get it off all the main cap pads. There we go, ready to set the crank in. Okay, so we got the bearings in our main caps. All these main caps are numbered. So the number usually goes to what would be the left-hand side of the engine block. So when it's upside down, you want your numbers that way. On the main caps, you don't want to zip them on with an impact or anything like that. You want to put them on with a hand tool just so you know they're seating down properly. You'll feel them get a little bit snug and just keep going back and forth to let that cap work its way down to its resting spot. We'll just snug them up. Same thing with number 2. Give it a good amount of assembly lube. Keep turning the crankshaft, make sure it's spinning freely. On this one here, you can see the thrust bearing. You want to make sure you get a good amount of lube on that. And what we're going to do with this cap, we'll snug them all down. We're going to leave this one just snug, just barely snug. We're going to move the crank back and forth to make sure that bearing is centered in the block. I don't know if the camera will pick it up or not, but on these radiused edges on the rear main cap, what I do is just put a very, very small amount of silicone just on that ridge, just to keep it from oil leaking past there. I'll just take a razor blade and scrape the excess. Okay, so torque spec for the main caps is 85 foot-pounds. What I like to do with these is do it in 2 stages. So we'll go to 40, and then we'll crank it up to 85 to finish it off. And we're going to start with our center main cap, then work our way out. Okay, so there's 40 on all of them. And here's 85. There we go, main cap's torqued. Check it again, make sure it spins over freely, which it does. Now, spin the engine over and start on the pistons. So what we'll do first is, since this is freshly honed, just going to give the cylinders a good wipe with some fresh oil. Okay, so we got our number 8 piston ready to go in the hole. Wipe down the cylinder walls with engine oil, and as you can see, we've soaked the piston with oil. We'll put our ring compressor on. Bring the piston up in the hole a little bit. Okay, so we'll take our ring compressor, make sure it's nice and square all the way around. I'm going to take one hand and guide the rod onto the crank as we tap the piston down. There goes the ring compressor. Let's wipe off some of this excess oil. You can hear the sound difference when it hits the crank. So now we'll spin the engine over and tighten up the rod bolts. The bearings we're using in this engine are the Cleveite tri-metal bearings. Very good quality bearing. This just being a more of a street build type engine, it'll do just fine for what we need. Okay, now that we got all our piston and rod assemblies in the engine, I'm going to go along and torque all these. All these go to 45 foot-pounds. Okay, now that all the rod bolts are torqued to 45 foot-pounds, just make sure it still spins over nice and freely. It feels nice and smooth, no tight spots. Now we can go ahead and throw our oil pump on. So with the oil pump, we went with a Melling high volume oil pump. Our oil pump's installed. I just want to make sure the pickup tube is level with the engine block. Do a little test fit of the oil pan when you go, just to make sure clearance is good there. Okay, now we'll spin the engine back over and put the camshaft in. So I'm just prepping these lifters. I'm going to soak them in some oil. There's a lot of zinc additive in there. Just give these the best chance they can get. But it's good practice to do is take two lifters, put them together, and you want them to rock slightly back and forth over. They go together and they don't have any rock to them. That means they don't have a dome machined into them. That dome helps these lifters spin on the camshaft and keeps them from getting flat spots. That's what's killing a lot of camshafts. Get the camshaft well lubed with this assembly grease it comes with. This is driven assembly grease. Driven kind of seems to be the leader in flat tappet oils and lubrications for these older engines. Seems like everybody recommends the driven oil. Okay, we got our timing chain and gears on. We got them lined up just dot to dot. We lubed the timing chain just with some assembly lube. Give it a little bit of lubrication on first startup. So now we'll set the timing cover on. Got to watch a lot of these bolt holes that go into water passages or oil passages. So we're going to want to hit all the bolts with some thread sealer. I just use the Permatex thread sealant. Couple bolts started, just hold that gasket there. Okay, so we got our timing cover and harmonic balancer on. I put a little bit of silicone on the inside of the balancer on the crank snout just to prevent any oil leakage between the balancer and the crank. So now we'll spin her over and throw the oil pan on.